Hi, this is Colette, and if you can hear this, then I have successfully figured out how to add audio to a slideshow presentation. Yay! And who said old dogs can't learn new tricks? I was surprised but excited when Wendy asked me to do a DIY tutorial for Memorable Seasons. She said she thought it would be fun for me to share with you my process for creating a scrapbook layout. Well, I'm always looking for an excuse to scrap, so I said, heck yeah, I'd love to. I spent a few days thinking about what I wanted to do. Got my camera set up on the tripod so I could photograph the process, and then I looked around for some pictures that I wanted to scrap. As most of you know, I recently took my 3 granddaughters and my 3 favorite scrapbook subjects to the ballet to see Giselle. I managed to take a few photos while we were out. Not many, but enough to tell the story, and so that's where I started. The 2 photos that I took outside were good enough, but the 2 photos that I took indoors in Symphony Hall were a little too pink, and frankly they were a little bit blurry. So I decided to change those 2 to black and white, and I figured that I'd make them a little bit smaller than the other 2 on my page to minimize the poor quality. So with that in mind, I set out to find a sketch that I could use as a place to start. I usually do that only because there's so many great sketches out there that really seem to spark my creative side, and I find that it helps to speed up what's already a time-consuming process for me. I'm a slow scrapper, and the less time I can spend pushing things around the page to get them looking right, the more pages I can get done. It just so happened that an Aussie friend of mine had recently pinned this sketch from scrapfriends.com that I really liked. I think it was the strong black elements that first caught my eye, but as I looked more closely, I noticed how the tag at the top and the ones on the left, in addition to the large flower cluster at the bottom right, it all created a good visual triangle, and that's so critical to a good scrapbook layout. I also liked the suggestion of the bubble wrap stamping on the background, and there was a generous space left at the bottom for journaling. And while my photos weren't exactly the same size or shape, I was confident that I could fit my own photos into the area that was available on the sketch. So yeah, this was the one I was going to use. The next thing that I do is pull pattern papers that will coordinate and complement my photos. At this point in time, I don't have any idea what I'm going to use where or which ones I'm going to use. I don't worry about that right now. I just pull papers that look good with my photos and that get me excited about using them. I had recently purchased these Fancy Pants papers from the Good Life line at my local scrapbook store, and the papers had the red color that was strong in my photos. The minty green wasn't exactly the same color as Brecken's teal chiffon dress, but it complemented it nicely, and I liked the gray and the black tones in some of the patterns. I thought that that would work well with the black and white photos that I was going to use. So this was the direction that I thought I'd take for this layout. I'm already kind of visualizing how the page is going to look, so at this point I'll dig around in my stash and pull embellishments that I think will coordinate with my papers and photos. Again, I don't worry about where or how I'm going to use them. Honestly, most of them probably won't get used at all. But I do know that I'm going to want to add some flowers, because for me, I love using flowers. I think there's a good way to add color on my girls' pages. I found a package of fun buttons that I could use as flower centers, and I had some epoxy word stickers that had the right colors. I wasn't sure whether the words were going to work, but I won't know that until I get farther along in the project. I love using scrapper's floss on my pages, so I took out the red and the black floss. And along with some other stuff, I pulled a couple of tickets from the RAK that Linda had sent to me a couple of months back. Thank you so much, Linda. Also, I had the actual tickets from that evening that we had used to get into the ballet, and I really wanted to find a way to incorporate this ephemera somehow, if I could, onto the final page. So once I have all of this gathered up together, I take it all and put it in a plastic tub, and then I take the tub over to my work desk, and then I have everything there, and it's organized and all kept together in a nice little bundle while I'm working on my project. For the past couple of years, my style has changed to where I like to have a layered background on my pages. I think that was mostly inspired by the pages of Kelly Gorey, who happens to be one of my scrapbook heroes. I like the frame effect around the page, and I find that it's a great way to help establish the color palette. And while the sketch that I'm using doesn't allow for this, it's easily adapted to it. I decided to use the red cardstock as the base for my page, and then leaving a small reveal, I wanted to create a frame using this busy floral pattern, layering it on top of the red. Well, since all you're going to see is about 3/4 of an inch all the way around, there's no sense in wasting paper that you won't see. So, using the width of my metal ruler as a guide, I trim around all 4 sides with my craft knife, and then I'll remove the center and put that in my scrap bin that I can use on another project later. And what a good thing, too. I'm sure I'm going to be able to find a good use for the reverse side of this busy floral. Isn't this black chevron pattern so fun? My sewing machine is set up on the return next to my desk area. I love having machine stitching on my pages, and keeping my sewing machine handy just makes it so easy to do. It's a simple texture, to be sure, but I think it adds to the handmade feel of a layout. On this one, I'm going to keep it simple. I'll just do a straight stitch around the outside edge. And here's a glimpse at what the project looks like so far. One of my favorite tools currently is any border punch. I particularly like this mini scallop punch by Fiskars. I use it quite a bit. Since the frame around my page is a light colored floral, I want to create some contrast by adding this black tuxedo stripe to the design. The black's going to tie in the black from the floral pattern, and I think it'll coordinate nicely with the black and white photos and the other black elements that I know I'm going to be using. I can visually see all of this in my mind, but I think it's because of the strong black elements that were in the sketch. I ended up mixing this strip with another little black stripe pattern later on in the process, just to make it a little more fun looking, and, well, because it's my page and I can if I want to. I like doing this also on the left side. Our eye tends to read from left to right, and this gives the viewer a good place to start when they're looking at the page. Also, I found a sheet of minty teal. It was a distressed solid by Basic Gray that made a nice transition from the floral frame and Brecken's dress. So I'm going to add that as my next layer. So here you can see the progress so far. When I placed the minty paper on the frame, it looked a little dull to me. There were splashes of yellow in the floral, so I got some yellow cardstock and placed it underneath the minty paper, leaving just a small reveal. I think it brightened up the whole overall feel of the page, and while I didn't originally intend to use the yellow on the layout, I'm pleased with the addition of it, and I actually like the added layer. I'll ink the edges of some of my papers to emphasize those layers. And I've always been a fan of outlining, so you'll always see black outlining on my projects. I like the definition that an outline adds to the paper elements on a layout. And on this one, I outlined the scalloped edge of the stripe with a black Sharpie. Oh my gosh! Doesn't this look cute so far? I'm actually feeling pretty good about it, and I haven't even gotten to the fun stuff yet. I'm going to refer you back to the sketch. I feel a little silly, but because nothing I've done so far has had anything to do with the sketch. But all right, now we're going to take it serious, sort of. One of the things that caught my eye in the sketch was the suggestion of the bubble wrap background accents. And I love adding layers of texture to my backgrounds. So let's play with that a little. Okay, there's no sense in overdoing it. There's no sense in texturing the whole background when you're only going to see small areas of it. Again, going for contrast, I decided to use this white cardstock as the mat for my photos. I picked this up at Scrap Fest in September, and it's heavily embossed with a really cute floral texture. So I loosely laid my photos on top of it just to check it for size and to get a visual feel for how it's going to look. Oh, I love how the pictures just pop off that white. And also, look how well the colors in the frame draw your eyes to the photos too. Ooh, it's all coming together beautifully, I think. And I'm sure you're thinking, finally, she's getting to the pictures. Anyway, I'm going to position the white on my page, and I'm going to lightly outline it with a pencil. That way, when I remove the white to do the background texturing, I'll know that anything I do inside that pencil line won't be visible on the finished project. Back in the day, when it was popular to put things that you found in the hardware store on your pages, I found this jumbo roll of drywall repair tape. I've had it forever. It's sort of sticky on one side, but it's easily removed and you can reposition it. The grid texture appeals to me, and it coordinates with nearly everything. So anyway, I've torn off a couple of strips of this tape, and I've adhered them to the minty background in the upper left corner and the lower right corner. Now, using a foam makeup sponge, I'm going to sponge some white gesso over that grid tape. I'll intentionally do it heavy in some areas and lighter in others, and then I'm going to let it dry for a few minutes. Honestly, it doesn't take very long. It dries pretty quickly. Oh, I don't know, maybe not more than about 5 minutes or so. So, while that's drying, I'm going to go get myself a fresh cup of coffee. And when I get back, I'll gently remove the tape, and then I'll ooh and ah over the fun woven texture that the gesso made. Finally, now for that bubble wrap texture. For this step, I usually use real bubble wrap, and while I don't do these fun bubbles on all of my pages, I do them quite often. But recently I picked up a new Tim Holtz bubble wrap stamp that was on sale, and I figured now would be a good time to break open that bad boy, and I'll give it a try here. I didn't have any minty ink color, so I just pulled some green and some blue ink that I had on hand. I first inked the stamp with one color, and then I randomly inked the stamp again with the other color, kind of layering over it. And then I stamped the bubble stamp over all of the gessoed areas. Well, quite frankly, I didn't like how the stamped bubbles looked against the white gessoed areas. They looked a little flat. So I took some clear embossing powder and sprinkled it over the stamped areas and then cooked it with my heat gun. The embossing added a wonderful sheen to those little dots, and I really liked the way it intensified the colors. The other thing was, and I didn't photograph it, but I figured my philosophy is more. So I decided to do some red paint splatters on top of the bubble wrapped stamp. So I did that at this point too. I just didn't photograph it. I really like a lot of dimension on my pages, and the layers of paper add a lot of visual dimension, which is why I do it. But I also like the richness that a page has when it has popped up elements. One of my favorite ways of doing this is to adhere some of my layers to chipboard before adding them to the layout. And on this one, I'm going to glue that white embossed cardstock to a sheet of chipboard and then trim it to size with a craft knife. Oh yeah, here's a product heads up for you. This glue stick came in the kit that we got in our Tim Holtz class at Scrapfest, and it is the bomb. It's a softer, gooey stick that dries clear and to a matte finish. It's called the Ink Essentials Collage Glue Stick by Ranger, and it is awesome. Another way I like to get dimension and depth on a page is by using transparencies. And on this one, I'm going to use my favorite Hambly Grid Transparency as a matte behind the chipboard, just as another added layer. Also, my sketch calls for a strong horizontal element, so I decided to use this teal gingham scalloped strip sticker for that. I outlined the scalloped edge with a black Sharpie and then cut it a little wider than my chipboard and thought it looked pretty fun the way it hung off the edges. Okay, let's refer to the sketch just one more time. You'll notice the tags that are peeking from behind the pattern paper. There's a group of them at the top right corner and another group on the left side. Those, in conjunction with that strong flower cluster in the lower right, creates the visual triangle on this page. That is so critical to a good page design, and I love how this one frames the photos. So we're going to work on those now. I started by adding an Allie Edwards I Love You stamp in the upper right hand corner. I loved the bracket shape of the basic gray journaling spot, but when I tucked it behind the white chipboard it got lost. I wanted it to stand out a little bit more, so I got a scrap piece of a black dotted paper and I laid the bracket sticker on it. And then, using some scissors, I trimmed the excess paper, leaving a generous black dotted border around the bracket. Oh, looked perfect. I also bought some chipboard embellishments that were part of this fancy pants line when I got the paper. And one of those embellishments was a frame that was shaped perfectly to fit my main photo. So I added it here, attaching it to the layout with foam dots. Again, just adding more depth and more dimension. I added some who and when journaling to the tag, tucked another fun-shaped journaling spot behind it, and then embellished that with a chipboard flower and a little simple button center tied with floss. Ordinarily, I love stickers and chipboard letters for my titles, but the cardstock die-cut letters that came with these papers were just the right size and color, so I used them and kept my title simple so it didn't detract from my photos. I thought I'd use the actual ticket from the event as the tag on the left side, but when I trimmed it to fit and placed it on the layout, it looked kind of lonely. So I cut 3 more tags from some coordinating papers that I had placed in the plastic tub at the beginning, and I layered them along with the ticket. It was a bit stronger statement than was suggested by the sketch, but I liked the bold look of them. It was just luck that the chipboard frame that I had used around my main photo was a yellowish beige color. Well, it tied in well with that cardstock reveal that I had done so long ago, but the yellow needed some balance on the layout. That's what prompted me to choose a yellow flower as added texture to the layered tags. And then I finished that flower off by embellishing the center with a mini clothespin holding a cardstock sticker that came from the line. I already knew I was going to use a large red flower with white polka dots on it as the main element in that large cluster in the lower right of the layout. But to support the visual triangle, I wanted to use some strong black elements in that cluster too, and everything that I tried looked terrible. So I decided just to make some simple leaves to tuck behind the flower. I didn't have any black leaves, but I did have an empty snack box that was sitting on my desk. So I cut a square from the box and then used that collage glue stick that I told you about to cover that square with a black dotted quilting fabric scrap that I had on hand. And while that was drying, I also cut out some branch and leaf die cuts with my Cricut, thinking that maybe I could use them to help embellish that cluster too. After that dried, then I cut 3 just randomly shaped leaves from that fabric covered chipboard and inked the edges and then used the Sharpie marker to outline them, and then I folded them a little bit in half, just creased them slightly to give them a little bit more dimension, and then tucked them behind the flower in my cluster. I ended up not needing those die cut branches that I used from the Cricut. They just kind of junked it up too much. Those fabric colored leaves really did the trick. I finished that cluster off with a few more flowers and buttons that coordinated with the colors on my page. Made a floss lasso and tied it with a bow for the button that I used as the flower center. I took one of those ticket stubs that Linda had given me and tucked it underneath the button to act like a tag, and then I just added some sticker words. It was easy and it's simple, but it turned out pretty cute, don't you think? Ta-da! Here it is, the finished page. I'm sure you're thinking, finally. I mean, it's certainly good enough to be done. There's a good visual triangle. It's surrounded by a colorful frame, and there's just enough stuff on it to make it appear lush and make you want to reach out and touch it. I didn't want my journaling to detract from the layout. Wanted to keep the focus on the photos and the design. So I added some hand journaling in that area suggested by the sketch using my white Signo pen. It's subtle, and frankly you don't even notice that it's there, which is good, yet it's visible if you want to read it. But still, it just felt like the page needed a little something more. Dotty circles! That's what it needs! Oh my gosh, it just isn't finished without some fun puffy paint dotty circles. Isn't it amazing how they just complete a page? Here's the finished project. All in all, I guess this took me a full day or so to complete. That's pretty typical for me, but I think it's worth every second, and I had a lot of fun working on it. I want to thank those of you who stayed with me through this entire process. It could have been shorter, but for me, there's nothing worse than hoping to see how a layout is made, only to be disappointed when some of the steps were left out. It was my goal to have you be able to see into the mind of Colette as she scraps, and hopefully, I've shared with you a few tips along the way that you'll find useful in your own scrapbooking. Wendy has asked me to extend a challenge to you, and I'm very happy to do that. My challenge, should you decide to accept it, is to create a layout using at least one of the techniques that I showed you today. It could be creating a frame for the base of your layout. It might be making those fun fabric leaves and using them in a flower cluster. Or you could even get some drywall tape and bubble wrap and create a cool textured background. And of course, there's always dotty circles. I'm not sure many of you are going to find time to scrap during these busy holidays, but maybe you'll refer back here when things calm down a bit and you find yourself in your own scrap room and wanting to try something new. Thank you so much for all of the support and the friendship and the encouragement that you guys have given me and given all the lucky members here at Memorable Seasons. Big squishy hugs to all of you.